meeting to order. It is, where am I? Sorry. It is April 17th, 1 or 2 minutes after 4 p.m. This is the Independent Ethics Board of the City of Tallahassee. I will note that Mr. Grant is excused. He is traveling for work. And so then the first item on our agenda is the minutes from our last meeting. Does anybody have any comments or corrections to the minutes? Seeing none, Mr. Davis moves the minutes and Ms. McNeil seconds. Seeing nods. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed nay. And the minutes are approved. Next item on our agenda is the Ethics Officer Report. And because we think highly of lacrosse in Tallahassee, and I'm not going to explain that, you'll have to guess, we're going to jump to the hotline tracking monthly report. And are there one or two of these?
Mr. Chair, what you have in front of you is one. It's identical to the one that went out with the agenda, other than a late-breaking addition to case number 122, based on the fact that Mr. Goad completed an investigation.
I told Mr. Sims we would hurry up on his so he can get to a family matter.
Okay.
Would that be items 133 and 34?
Let me see. That would be 133 and 134.
Okay, so
yes.
we're going to do item 133 first. So we're on the hotline tracking monthly report, which I think is the second item in the Ethics Officer Report. And we're going to do items 133, 134, then we'll go back up to and finish with the top part of the list. So on 133, you're recognized.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. These two are actually related issues, and there have been various issues that this complainant has brought forth to the city and also to this board related to communication type issues. This individual wishes to continue to cultivate and actually get additional support for a program here in the city to assist people that are coming out of jail to get reemployed. So he has been working in that capacity to get that program up and running. The complainant states that he's encountered various difficulties in setting meetings, in communicating with appropriate staff, being appropriately respected in his view by these various staff, and these issues had been talked about before the board before the issues were closed by the board by your vote. However, since then, there have been access restrictions placed on this individual by Chief Gaines, who's the fire chief and in charge of building security. So based on that, Chief Gaines imposed some access restrictions that the complainant disagrees with. I brought that to your attention last month. That was closed. The complainant contacted me this month indicating that he disagreed with or did not believe that my report had adequately documented his issues, that he had provided me with names of people that I should call in order to investigate his issues. I explained to this caller that I only investigate upon direction of the board, that I assess the issues in the complaint and make a recommendation based on whether I believe it falls within the board's parameters. In all of those cases, I recommended closure, and the board agreed. So now the complainant is back because he had contacted Chief Gaines about the access restrictions and was told that these restrictions are going to continue past the time, I think, that he had expected, and again asked me to further investigate and look at it. So he's also filed civil rights complaints with the city EEO office. It's my recommendation again today that the board close this matter because I'm unsure what remedies the board could offer to him.
Mr. Sims, I'm going to recognize you as you walk up. Short version, I think, of all that. Item 133, Mr. Sims is concerned about his access to this building and to employees housed in this building, and restrictions have been placed on that access. And item 134, he is concerned about funding for a program that is near and dear to him, and how he's not been able to work out the funding with the city. And on both of those, then, he is concerned that his complaints are not being treated duly by this board. So, Mr. Sims, you're recognized.
And thank you, Mr. Chairman, and my son thanks you as well for this gratis. And I want to go quickly because my issues are comprehensive, and so let me just do the bullet. First is, I disagree with the summary that Ms. Keefe gave you all in reference to my case that caused for it to be closed. She left out that I had a meeting with Chief Gaines and two of his subordinates, and there were information and testimony provided saying that a lot of these reports that were sent to Mr. Gould or Goat were incorrect or misinterpreted. But the second point is, the Tallahassee Democrat pointed that 3 days ago there was a poll taken that 83% of our law enforcement officers think that Chief DeLeo is a liar. That 86% thinks that management does not back them up. Here is why. I sit down and I talk with Chief Gaines, who is the fire chief. I explain my situation that Ms. Keefe did of all of the areas of problems that I've had. When an officer, a first responder, talks to a citizen and tells a citizen, I agree with what you're saying, but I need you to meet me halfway. Give me 30 days of no incidents. I need you to do X, Y, and Z. And then we're going to reinstate you. And I said, well, Chief Gaines, I don't have a problem with giving you that, but I want to make you aware of an incident that you did nothing. And he said, well, where? He said, because if you make me aware of an incident where there's been a security violation, I don't care if they're white, black, rich, or poor, I'm going to follow protocol. He gave me his word on that. I gave him my word that there would be no incidents with me in the 30 days. He wrote this letter. I'm just going to read for time's sake, Commissioner, of the incident where management says, no, this guy is rich. This guy is white. He does a lot of business. He's not like Stanley. Stanley is not politically connected. Stanley he's a black ex-felon. Listen what this rich guy did. I'm not going to call his name because I've done business with him, and he's a good guy. He just don't have a tolerance for foolishness. Listen what he did. It was brought to my attention on Wednesday, January 17th at approximately 4 o'clock. The incident occurred at City Hall, this building, wherein you pulled in the gate, right up under the gate of City Hall, and advised the officer that you had a meeting in City Hall and there was no parking available in Clayman Plaza. Our officer then informed you that parking under City Hall was restricted and required prior authorization. In an effort to provide customer service to you, which he left out. This guy was cussing the officer out. Pretty much told him, I'm not going to do what you say. He went ahead, the officer opened the gate, said, I'm going to open the gate for you and allow you to park in the aisle while I get you clearance to resolve your situation. This white male, politically connected, said, bump you with an F, parked his car, went to his meeting, nothing happened. And when the chief wanted to file a letter to do proper for every citizen, management said no. No. So the word that the chief gave to me, the regular citizen, was voided by upper management. I asked one more question to Ms. Julie Keefe, because I asked this question because Commissioner Richardson said something about this commission that kind of touched me, but now I'm beginning to understand why he have concern about this board. I asked Ms. Julie Keefe, how many cases have regular people like me has received any relief? And the answer is 0. 0. So my point, and I'm closing, we need you to get greater authority, because I view this board as misleading, because other city employees, unlike me, are out of the reach. I'm out of, well, some people don't think I'm out of the reach of Regal because he continuously come after me. But city employees, I had a city employee tell me that she did not even know that negative emails that she was sending was being interpreted as negative towards me. And so my problem is, all of what I've suffered, you can't offer me no remedy. And Mr. Holloman, I've known your family a long time. You've never been one to just sit on boards just to have it on your resume. I've known Colonel Grant for a very long time. I hope this is not a show. Mr. Hearing, I believe in my heart that you have compassion for my situation, but here is the bottom line. Where do I go for a remedy? You said no. He won't even meet with me. He said he has staff to do that. Ask Miss Julie Keefe how many times I've requested to meet with the city manager. And when that has happened, you heard how we had to gather around our cell phone. I'm black. I'm an ex-felon, but I pay taxes. And where that comes from, that's representation. That's no representation with hard taxation, and that's unfair.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Sims. Comments, questions from members of the board?
He's here.
Well, we have, let's take these one at a time. We have 133, which would ask us to investigate the access restrictions that have been placed on Mr. Sims, which, as I understand, limitations on coming in the building or coming in the building unescorted. Ask us to investigate those further as an ethics matter. Is there anybody here who feels that we have the authority to pursue that as an ethical violation?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Sims.
even if I've shown you that there's inconsistency in the restriction of the policy, when I've read your quota, you talk about corruption, you talk about misuse of power. In all of the literature and the emails that I've sent to Julie, it is clearly demonstrated there is an abuse of power, and I hate to use this C word that comes out of Washington, collusion.
I did talk to Chief Gaines.
Well, let's do this.
May I make a suggestion?
Mr. Sims?
I would like that if we could talk with Chief Gaines, me and Julie, and I can present a case where there is collusion, where I am being strictly enforced, where other people are getting a pass, because there are other incidents as well. And I'm just sure with the numerous things that have occurred, Mr. Chairman, I just find it very difficult that I don't fit in these scopes somewhere.
Yeah. Apparently, the board's not finding a lot of ethical bite in this, but let's do with the permission of the board. How about if we do this? If we ask staff to come back to us next month with a clear, with either the written policies or a clear explanation of the written policies concerning access to the building and the restrictions that can be placed on access, how they're applied and when they're applied, so that we understand the nature of this, and if we can find an ethical flaw in those policies or in the application of those policies, then you're in our jurisdiction.
And I think that flaw is going to be in this letter that I showed you, as well as that meeting. Thank you for your time.
Yes, sir.
Go Lincoln.
So would the members of the board be okay if we ask Ms. Meadows-Keefe to do that? That would actually educate us on one of the city's policies that's pretty close, since it covers this building specifically. Then on item 134, this goes back to the funding of the program. This is the program that involved ex-felons washing city vehicles or cleaning, doing the appearance maintenance on city vehicles, not the mechanical maintenance. We've looked at this before, and again, not been able to find an ethics hook in this. It's a matter of, it has seemed to be the city deciding where and how to maintain its fleet.
There's an update, too.
Oh, and Ms. Meadows-Keefe says there's an update, so would you fill us in, please?
Well, this organization, and the name escapes me, has now applied for a human services type grant to expand and fund the program. It still would consist of, I think, car washing, but it would formalize the program a bit more, give it additional funding, and Mr. Sims has presented to the committee that's been tasked with allocating dollars for programs like this in the community. So he's awaiting, I believe, a decision on that. So that's up to that committee to decide. So I'm not sure what role the board would have at this time in dealing with that.
Okay, is there anybody who wants to keep this open? I think with that we would have consensus to close this. Ms. Meadows-Keefe, in the interest of board education, could you come back to us next month and describe the process by which these types of grants are determined by the city, noticed, what the process is? Because if people are going to complain to us about not getting grants or the grant process, it may be helpful for us just to get some basic information, because I know I have no idea how that works. So that would be a good educational moment, and if once we know more, we might be able to find an ethics link in a complaint like this, which we're not now seeing.
I will do that.
Okay. I think we're going to jump, Mr. Goad is here, I think we're going to jump to item 122 on this list. Excuse me for jumping around, but I'm trying to recognize people's time. This is and you may have seen the article last night was published in the Democrat. Mr. Burlew summarized this. Mr. Goad had asked, and thank you for doing that. I know this member of this board appreciates. This was the situation where the prior city manager got football tickets and subsequently re-gifted 2 of those tickets to city employees. And the question then became whether those employees were reporting individuals, whether they were required to report them as gifts under either state law or city policies. And Mr. Goad asked Mr. Lavin, I guess it was, to do a thorough review of that. Have I covered that well enough, Ms. Meadows-Keefe?
I believe that you have.
So, Mr. Goad, would you like to give us the nickel tour of the results, since you're here?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I think you outlined the predicate of the situation correctly. There was a complaint that actually came to your board back in late 2017 or sometime fall 2017. It was shared with me by Ms. Meadows-Keefe, and we looked into it, and the thrust of it was the question of whether 2 employees attended. I think there was a question of whether or not they had attended the football game in September of 2016, where they got the tickets, whether that was an issue as it relates to Chapter 112 Florida statutes. And so we embarked upon an investigation. I attempted to do that investigation myself. What I learned quickly was it was more complicated than I would have thought it would be, especially as it relates to the valuation of the tickets and the application of Chapter 112. And so I asked Mr. Lavin to help me with that, and he did a very thorough job. You have the report, I believe. If you've not read it in its entirety, I would encourage you to do so. And I think it lays out the issues. I think it was easy to validate that the employees did, in fact, attend the football game. In fact, there was a third employee that was a non-reporting individual that attended the football game as well. They got the tickets from Rick Fernandez, who was their boss at the time. There was nothing asked in return for the tickets. They were simply offered to the employees. That was easy to establish. Where we spent a great deal of time was in the valuation of the tickets, because there was a threshold of $100 or over $100 that was in question as it related to the evaluation of this. And so ultimately we identified, or Mr. Lavin identified, 5 different methods that could be used to determine the value of the tickets. That included the printed face value. That's laid out as one method to determine the value of tickets. On that face value was $30. It also included, in 1994, the Florida Commission on Ethics issued an opinion on, interestingly enough, Florida State skybox tickets, and it was a very explicit methodology. That methodology is confusing. The numbers that go into that are not readily available, and that took a great deal of time to ascertain that information. Other comparables included the value of the Florida State University President's skybox as an equivalent, as well as it turns out the boosters have a price sheet for guest tickets in skyboxes. That totals 5 different methods. 4 of the 5 methods indicated that the tickets were worth between $30 and $100. Value being 30, and the price sheet I think was 100, and values in between there. The method using the Florida Commission on Ethics methodology, I believe, was the one that was $128. The clearest evidence of the information was that the price sheet of the skyboxes probably was the most indicative of value at $100. And so we spent a lot of time working on that so we could render some conclusion as it related to the employees that were reporting individuals. There's more information in the report that I would welcome you to read, but it helped us make our conclusion. At this point, though, it was clear, so we were able to make the conclusion related to Chapter 112 and the 2 employees and the value of the ticket as we tried to apply that standard. What became clear, though, is that we need greater awareness as an organization as it relates to these matters. And therefore, it's my intention to have a workshop in the very near future that will be supported by the International City Managers Association. So we'll bring an outside party in. This is a continuation of a discussion we had, Chairman Herron, you will recall in January, we had a workshop on ethics. I thought it was a very productive workshop. You presented to us at that workshop, as well as Julie Meadows Keefe did too. I thought that was good. Clearly, we need to instill a culture of top-of-mind awareness, not casual awareness, not a situation where you find yourself in trying to evaluate a gift and trying to determine whether the gift is appropriate. I think it needs to be an easier decision. I think that comes with more awareness and greater training. And so that's the course we will embark upon. So we've reviewed the issue at hand. And I shared with you a report, and it's my pleasure to be here today so I can share with you our thoughts on this. We also want to make sure that we're taking the opportunity to make sure all of our employees get ethics training. Ms. Meadows Keefe does that today. I want to make sure they get it right off the bat, even if it's duplicative, to make sure when they enter the door they understand this is a principle of the organization, as well as to ensure that we have refresher training. Again, it may be a little boring. We may be replowing old ground, but it will send a clear signal that this is important. These matters do make a difference, and put those kind of things in place. So that's the thrust of the report. I'll be happy to answer any questions you have or add any additional detail.
Okay, members, questions of Mr. Goat? You recognize?
Yes, sir. Did you determine that the applicable statute applies in this situation regardless of the value of the ticket? I mean, to the reporting individuals who receive a ticket from a fellow city employee, does the statute apply to that situation?
I believe the statute applies to that extent. That there's another section, I don't have it on the top of my head, that if they receive the gift from another employee, they could receive the gift in excess of $100, but they would be required to report it. So I think that would be the applicability. Once you establish the value at $100 less, all of that is moot. So I believe that would be the applicability of the statute in that regard. And we did establish that they did receive the ticket from a fellow employee, or in this case it was their boss.
Right. The way I understand the statute, if you are a RIPE, a reporting individual, or a procurement employee, you can receive gifts of pretty much any value from a list of specific family members. But if it's not one of those, and there are limited situations that could be where you might be receiving a gift for a charitable organization and passing it on. You're simply a conduit. You collect the checks for the Cancer Society and then turn them in as part of a fundraising event. But if it's from any third party, there would be certain gifts from certain lobbyists, for instance, it would be completely prohibited, but then there would be people who are co-workers, friends, distant relatives, old high school buddies, the guys you play baseball with on the weekends. You can take gifts from them, but if they're over $100, you have to report them. And gifts are defined very broadly to include travel. So if you ride in your buddy's vehicle down to South Florida, that might be a reportable gift. If you stay in somebody's condo for the weekend, that might be a reportable gift. It's not just cash or the cash value or the direct cash value. It would be the fair market value of the service you receive in some cases.
Is that an interpretation, has that been fleshed out in the case law or in opinions from, because when I read the statute, I don't see any of that. I'm just curious.
There are a number of Ethics Commission opinions on gifts, and they have on their website, they have a very nice 1-page or 2-page summary of all the gift provisions. But again, we're talking about as they apply to RIPEs, reporting individuals and procurement employees. That's a unique and somewhat limited set of people. So most of the city of Tallahassee employees would be neither reporting individuals nor procurement employees. I want to also point out that all of this happened before this board had jurisdiction that it has today. So even if there were a violation, I don't know that there's much we could do about it, because Mr. Currington has consistently advised us that when our jurisdiction was expanded, anything that happened after that or that was ongoing after our jurisdiction was expanded was something we could deal with as an ethics violation, but anything that happened before that, when it wasn't within this board's jurisdiction, is something we cannot reach back to opine on.
Mr. Chair?
Recognize.
Second question. I didn't see anything in the memorandum that talks about the city's gift policy. And I was just curious as to what it is and how it might or might not apply in this circumstance.
The test on the complaint was targeted to Chapter 112 of Florida statutes. The city has a gift policy. It has been changed to comport with state law, to be consistent with state law. We did not test that policy in this case. We addressed the complaint very specifically related to Florida statute Chapter 112.
I believe that currently, though, a violation of the city's gift policy would fall under our jurisdiction as it now stands. Is that correct?
Yeah, if the violation occurred now, I think that it could fall under the rubric of misuse of position. There's a couple ways we might hook into it, yes.
Okay, so I'm just curious, I don't know if you could tell me, what is the city's gift policy now?
The current gift policy very much mirrors the Chapter 112 as it relates to a $100 threshold, who you can take gifts from, who you can't take gifts from, and the reporting requirement.
Does the current policy address gifts between employees in the city?
I would have to defer to my city attorney to give me that opinion. I assume it does. I believe it applies. That I would give you my opinion of that. It also applies to all employees. I should be clear. The state law, as the chairman has pointed out, is applicable to reporting individuals, which has a certain threshold regarding positions and their purchasing ability. So the city's policy would be broader than that, but it very much is consistent with what state law would be.
Mr. Holloman, on the next agenda, we will have that policy in front of us, and we'll walk kind of line by line through it, since it would have some implications for our jurisdiction. But I think that's the big thing, is their policy would cover alignment with the city electric utilities, who would not be a reporting individual or procurement employee, that you can't go out and give him or her a $500 tip to hook up your house first in the neighborhood. That would be a prohibited gift, which under state law, because they're not a reporting individual, it might be another ethics problem, but it wouldn't be a gift problem specifically. But we'll put that on the next agenda and walk through that specifically. If there are other questions,
I don't have a question. I just like to say I appreciate this report and the recommendations the city has made to go the extra mile to remind employees of gift restrictions.
I do have one question for you. I understand for the two people involved in this report, at the time, one of them was a reporting individual and one was not. And today they are both reporting individuals. Is that correct?
I think for clarity, both employees technically were reporting individuals as defined by the state.
Okay.
One employee had not been made aware of that, was essentially serving in the same capacity that she had previously served, but due to a reorganization and a reassignment of reporting duties, that technically changed, which put her into the reporting category. She was not made aware of that. That kind of fell, in a crack, if you will, and she wasn't informed. That will be something we will improve upon in terms of making sure that the employees that are reporting individuals that meet that definition are very clear on that, and then perform the required reporting as well as understand the limitations that come with that. So in this case, both were, but one was unaware of it because they had not been told.
Are you recommending in her case, if she was a reporting individual and wasn't aware of it, that means she would not have filed her Form 1 with the Florida Commission on Ethics? Are you recommending to her that she go back and for that whatever period that she was but didn't know it and file
Yes,
late
sir,
file
I believe
is?
so. And
Okay.
The awareness only came late last year, early this year. Yes, sir.
Okay. Other questions? I have 3 cards. Let's do in alphabetical order. Mr. Butzine, is this your issue? Okay. Mr. Wilcox? Oh, that's not alphabetical order, but anyway, Mr. Wilcox, I'm sorry, Mr. Jackson. I apparently don't know my ABCs.
You're doing it issue by issue, remember? You're doing it issue by issue.
Yeah. So, Mr. Wilcox, we're on this specific item. Right. Okay.
Good afternoon, members of the Mr. Chair and members of the board. I'm Ben Wilcox with Citizens for Ethics Reform. I think at the last meeting on this issue, I made the comment that I didn't have much confidence in the investigation being carried out by the interim city manager, and I really feel it is not the independent investigation into this issue that would be envisioned under the charter amendment. You're asking, an employee to investigate, his employees. So it appears to me that this report, and I just saw it for the first time today. I did read the story in the Democrat, but it appears to me that it's more of a whitewash than it is an independent investigation. You spend a lot of time talking about the value of skybox football tickets and why that this particular game didn't cost as much as other games, and I just am not satisfied, I guess, with the results of this investigation. It also, in the story in the Tallahassee Democrat, it says the report dated Thursday doesn't say where Fernandez got the football tickets or whether they came from Adam Corey's Unconventional Strategies lobbying firm. That's not an investigation. I mean, we need answers to these questions. And finally, my request to you as the ethics board, I think you need to respond to this report, much like you did to the earlier complaint involving the city manager, and make your own suggestions for actions by the city, and weigh in on whether this behavior is ethical. An advisory opinion like you did before. And that would conclude my remarks.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Wilcox. We will later in the meeting address a couple of those issues. Mr. Jackson. And Mr. Stewart, you're on the same issue? Yes. Okay.
Sorry, it took me a while to get around here. The city, I'm afraid I caused them to redesign our city hall here, and I apologize for that. But we're trying to change, get a few new city commissioners in here, and my goal is to get this moved back there. I always like to feel close to the people I'm talking to, and I certainly have a close feeling with everyone up there. And I'm still working on my close feeling with the city.
We do need to get you a taller microphone, though. I know
okay.
that. You may end up with a backache.
My mom always said don't hunch over, but that is a problem. Dr. Irwin Jackson, 1341, Jackson Bluff, otherwise sometimes known as the Tallahassee Truth Teller. I worked for 10 years as a state auditor, so maybe I have a kind of a slanted view when I go into a client. One thing I learned as being an auditor, was a saying, and I think it's very appropriate at this time. Figures don't lie, but liars do figure. Now, what we have here is a document that to me is practically worthless. It has some value if it's shredded up, maybe, and recycled. It's 32 pages. It took 7 months. How much this cost us, I have no idea, but it's clearly put together and I hate to say this, Reese, because I had high expectations for Reese, that you come up with the answer. We need to find these tickets worth less than $100. Okay, how are we going to go about that? If you really want to know the value of these tickets, it's real clear. You could ask me. I've got 8 tickets in a skybox. It cost me $18,000 for the season. That's $321. Didn't take me 7 months to figure that out. The boosters went through in this document. It's their tickets. They ought to know what the value is. Even when you subtract the tax basis and who gets the tax deduction and da-da-da-da, okay, let's give them all that. The boosters still came up with a value of $128.17. That was over $100, so that was discredited. That was exempt. We can't use that one. We have another problem. In my looking at this just briefly before I came in here, nowhere I called the folks at the boosters office, and I can get this in writing. There was something that was missing in their calculations. The cost of liquor and food. And I spent some time up there. It's good liquor. It's not cheap stuff. You go to the President's box, you don't get liquor. You don't get beer. I think it's only wine. The cost is $400 for liquor and food. For, let's say, 7 games. In 2016, though, it was only 6 games. But if you put in 7, you do the calculations, that's another $57 per ticket for food and liquor. If you add the food and liquor in, then the dollar amount that Reese Goad presented would all be over $100. I have another thing that, again, if you're trying to keep this under $100, you got to be careful the questions you ask when you do investigations. There's a lot of tap dancing going around. So the food, no one wanted to talk about. Now, they may say they went there and were there for 5 hours and ate nothing and drank nothing. Well, that's still the cost of the ticket. No one dare ask the question to either of these people is, did you only go to a football game one time? They're talking about Charleston Southern specifically and only. Did Reese say, hey, Ellen, how often do you go to the skybox? No one asked the question. You know why? You know the answer. She's up there at least 3-4 times. Oh, well, now I know we're way over $100. But the sad thing is no one asked the question because they didn't want the answer. That's part of the cover-up. We dealt with Fernandez, and now we're back into covering up. So I think there's a violation. There's a violation that there's cover-up going that helped produce this report. You could also ask the question, Ellen, you got 2 tickets, right? Yeah. Well, who went with you? It's not reported in here. My understanding, it was her husband. Whoops, that's a problem. Don't ask that question, because that means all the dollars have just been doubled by 2. So by the time you add in the liquor, you double the number of tickets, we're way over $100. The problem now is simply the cover-up in the city manager's office. This also proved something that I said months ago that we cannot ask the city manager to do an investigation and decide if any of his staff have done anything wrong. Rick Fernandez, and I think the Ethics Commission is going to show this here in another month and a half, used city employees to modify his house and labor and materials. Now, if we call the city manager Rick Fernandez, you think he'd have turned himself in? Probably not. The staff person that we have now is a fine person. She needs to be working. We need a 50% time administrator. We need to have a 50% of the time investigator. We don't need an attorney. We need a retired cop, FBI guy, someone who wants to work on the side when we have problems like this. We would have had the right questions answered if an investigator went in there and asked the questions. Now, the answers that I've shared with you, the number of times she was there, the husband was there, we've got pictures of several of those, but it's like, why should a private citizen have to spend my time trying to prove there's a cover-up in City Hall? So, okay, forget the ticket. Let them walk. Say you weren't in charge. But you were in charge when this document was given to you, and it is a whitewash, it is a cover-up, it's not complete, it was designed to mislead you and the public. And I appreciate the Democrat being here. My understanding is the Democrat has asked the city manager, at my request, how many times did Ellen Blair go to these football games? To my understanding, there's been no response. So, since Reese is here, I think he is.
No, not anymore.
He left?
Yes, sir.
Are you kidding me? And I wanted to talk to him, but that's okay. I was going to ask him right now if he had asked that question. He certainly didn't report it, and if he knew how many times she did go. Anyway, I'll wrap that up. Those are the two things we need. We have to have an investigator. It can be part-time, call as needed, and otherwise, again, this Ethics Commission, Ethics Board is falling really short because we have no one that we can trust. Thank you very much.
Mr. Stewart.
Steve Stewart, 3048 Waterford Drive. Mr. Chairman, thank you. I'll be brief. I'm a reporter with Tallahassee Reports, and I have some concerns about how information is making it out into the public sphere. There's a process here where you file for public records request. I filed for a public record request on this investigation late February. They said it was not done yet. And Mr. Burlew, who is a great reporter, somehow came up with the information Monday. Now, I have checked, and there is no public records request filed in the clerk's office by Mr. Burlew. And my hat's off to him getting the report. But I think we need to find out if we're all going to play by the same rules if we have a competitive media here. And again, I don't begrudge anybody getting a lead or some information, but the city is supposed to have a policy that's followed. And I'd like to find out if anyone on the ethics board or the independent ethics officer leaked this document to one select media group.
And no, sir, as far as I know, I can tell you Julie sent me an email late yesterday evening that she did not know about the report but had just seen it in on the Tallahassee Democrat website, which is also where I saw it for the first time.
I did not leak the report.
Well, I think that this is something that that the ethics board needs to look into with the city of Tallahassee, because this is getting into this realm of where we're doing favors for local media, which comes back. We've already had an issue with that with the mayor of Tallahassee, and I'm not going to sit back and continue to have this happen, because you know, if they're going to collude with one select group of media, it's going to be publicized. Again, I will tell this group that I just went across the way and checked with the Public Records Office, and there's no request for this document. Okay, and unfortunately, Mr. Go did get out of here pretty quick. I was going to ask him if he leaked it, but I don't expect Mr. Burlew to say anything because I would not either. But this is an issue that needs to be addressed, and I hope maybe someone would check into it with Mr. Goat since he's the city manager. Thank you.
Okay. Let me just ask, since you raised the question, did any other members here find out about this report before it was reported in the Tallahassee Democrat? So,
Thank you.
I mean, it's self-report, so take that for what it's worth. But Ms. Baer, are you on this issue?
What's seen is on my report.
Thank you. I'll be brief. I know we've already talked about this before in previous meetings, but I wanted to again state it for the record on why this investigation was being conducted by the City of Tallahassee as opposed to the Ethics Board. The Ethics Board is independent of the city, and we expect that independent investigation. And I know there's a budget for an investigator within the Ethics Board, so again, why didn't you do that? And then again, the complaint was filed with the Ethics Board, so why would it be passed off to the city? The Ethics Board is independent, again, and not an ombudsman to pass off every investigation to different agencies. So we would like to again see you guys address this.
Okay. Comments, questions from members of the board? Mr. Holloman, you're recognized.
I wish we could investigate it too, but the simple fact is that because of when this incident occurred, it didn't fall within the jurisdiction of this board. But if it happens again, it'll be a different kind of investigation because it will be within our jurisdiction. But I'm frustrated too. But there's not, our council has advised us that we don't have jurisdiction over things that occurred during the time frame when this incident occurred. And that's, if you don't have jurisdiction, you don't have jurisdiction. So, I think on a going forward basis, we're going to be better positioned because we do have a little bit more, our jurisdiction is broader now than it had been. So I understand your frustration, but there's really nothing that we can do.
But this report, though, what happened today, yesterday, written out, you can certainly have to respond to this report because it's not accurate. And I think there should be some questions after we go. Why he didn't ask a question about how many additional games they went to, who she took, all these things that happened yesterday or last 7 months.
Okay, for the record, that's Dr. Jackson talking from the front row rather than on the microphone, saying that because the report came out just today, he thinks that we ought to take a look. What I would propose to this board that we do is we hold this issue for next month. We all just seen this either late last night or today, not had a chance to digest it, and certainly not had a chance to digest any of the comments or questions that we heard. If that's okay, we'll just continue it. Does anybody have an objection to doing that?
Sure.
Mr. Currington.
I'd just like to make a point of clarification. I know it's very frustrating for everybody in this room, I think, about this board's limited power. There is an agenda item number 7 that takes a small step towards solving some of that, if we can get it passed. But using this as an example, there were 2 problems for this board. One was the timing, as Mr. Holloman just said. It occurred before this board had any authority. But secondly, the complaint was regarding the state ethics code. This board still has no authority to enforce the state ethics code. So this event could occur tomorrow, and we could get the same complaint, and this board has no authority. The city commission needs to or adopt an ethics code that incorporates 112 if that's what you want solved. Okay, so it's the city commission's lap. The other point that I think is item 7 is about this board's ability to investigate.
Yes, and we'll spend some time.
And secondly, what is frustrating also, this board does not have the authority to enforce the city's gift code or its personnel policies. I think I said at the last board meeting, we could get a complaint tomorrow about sexual harassment. It's not in the ethics code. It may be in the Human Resource Policy Manual. It may be somewhere else in the city's procedures and policies. This board does not enforce the city's policies and procedures. That is the sad truth.
fire anybody.
On a situation like that, we would have to find a link to some authority we do have, like misuse of position. So you could have a harassment case involve misuse of position. There'd be technically two different violations, and one of them would be within our jurisdiction. And I think we would look at each of those from a jurisdictional perspective. Mr. Wilcox, you're recognized.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to take a little bit of issue with Mr. Currington's analysis there. I mean, he's very good at explaining how your limited powers, prevent you from taking action on things. But I would just remind you, and I said in my initial remarks that I would like for the board to consider issuing an advisory opinion like you did in the earlier City Manager Fernandez wedding case, which would also meet the same, prohibitions, not in your jurisdiction at the time, but would hope that the board would consider responding to the report from the interim city manager and issuing an advisory opinion on just the appearance of the whole thing. Thank you.
Anybody else? We may have some further stuff on the agenda. I think we'll come back and we'll talk a little bit more about this at the next regular meeting, and Julie and Jerry may have sage advice for us after we've had, again, a chance to digest. I will admit I have read the news article. I have not read the full, even the report itself is really 9 pages. The rest is attachments and appendices. I have not read the full 9 pages, so I'm operating at somewhat of a disadvantage here. With that, we would move to item 112 on this list. Ms. Meadows-Keefe, you're recognized.
Okay. Item 112 is a matter that is pending before the Florida Commission on Ethics, and it's only being held open until I can report to the board the outcome from the Ethics Commission, and I expect that'll happen in the next month or two.
So that one will remain pending?
Yes, sir.
Item 117.
Item 117, it's the same issue that the P-card audit is not yet complete. I see the acting city auditor, Mr. Hancock, back there. I don't see that audit's been issued. No, and he's indicating no. When that audit is issued, it will be brought here before the board, and we can discuss that.
Okay, so that one remains pending.
Yes.
Item 132.
Item 132, this one was basically one I closed myself, as I'm able to do under our bylaws. This person was calling from a place in Florida that had no local ethics board and had an ethics complaint. So I provided them with the number of the Florida Ethics Commission.
Okay, anybody have any comments, questions about any of those? So we'll be back on several of these next month. The first item in the ethics officer report is her monthly report, which is the memorandum from Ms. Meadows-Keefe with a series of bullets. Does anyone have any comments or questions on any of these? Ms. Meadows-Keefe, is there anything in particular you need to point out that was unusual this month in terms of your activities? I know you and I talked a number of times on background materials, and we've all gotten a number of emails from you on articles that have appeared, information that's appeared, so that we're all aware of the same stuff.
Right. And sometimes I feel like this report doesn't necessarily reflect the specific day-to-day activities that I do. I know there was one complainant here today who I spent several hours with and explored various issues that he had, seeing if I could address them. So things come up, staff make inquiries, people call and ask questions. So the thing of note this month, though, and I think I will be talking about this perhaps in another agenda item, is we are starting the budget process for fiscal year 2019. So we've begun preliminary work on that. And then to follow up on the board's desire to do an RFP for board council. We did get that together. I believe it was 10 firms received an RFP, and we are awaiting the results from that and see which firms respond.
Well, it's an open RFP, so anyone could respond to it.
Correct.
But you went, as I understand, you and the city folks went through and found 10 local firms of repute and who would have arguably somebody who would know about Florida ethics.
You're correct, and they have to be registered on, I think it's called Bid Pro.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, the next item is the board's budget. Anything, and this is our
Current
tracking
budget.
the current budget. Will come up to the later on the agenda, the city's budget process. But any questions? It looks like this month you anticipate looking a lot like last month.
Yeah, I do, Mr. Chair, and I will say that in speaking with Mr. Wiggin, the fact that we do disclose our budget expenditures monthly exceeds expectations, and so we are behaving transparently with our budget and being accountable each month.
Oh, I'm sure there's something hidden in here. Just kidding.
Those manicures.
Manicures. The next item, and this is something new that Julie and I talked about, and we know that a little over a year ago we did our set of recommendations to the city in terms of expanding our jurisdiction, in terms of city policies that we thought might change, or city procedures that we thought that might change, and a set of recommendations to ourselves about how we might operate better. Anticipating doing that in the future and not wanting to miss any good ideas, I asked Julie to keep kind of a blue sky list that we put in front of the board members every month. This is the one, it's a memorandum from Julie. It's dated April the 12th, and it's titled Running List of Possible Recommendations. These are nothing cast in stone. I just don't want to take the opportunity of missing somebody's good idea if we talk about it one month and then we get actually down to doing the exercise that we've forgotten about it 3 months later. And also, if there are things, good ideas that people have, or possible ideas that people have, it will give us time to do research and evaluation if there are things that require some lead-in thought processes.
So, Mr. Chair, I would request that if board members in between meetings have a brainstorm about something they think they'd like to consider, so they read an article or hear about something, that they provide that to me, and then that can be on the list, and then when the time is appropriate, the board can go through, like in a workshop format, and go through each recommendation. So you don't have to wait for a meeting necessarily to submit an item to me that you're thinking about.
Yeah, we can't talk to each other about it, but
You can-
put an item on the list anytime you have a brainstorm.
Right.
Does anybody have any comments on the current list? Ms. Meadows-Keefe, I would offer you 3 comments. On the 5th bullet, I would like to at least talk about ensuring that public comment opportunity in city commission meetings always must occur before votes are taken. That's an issue we've heard about before, and it is one that strikes me as being at the heart of public confidence and ethical behavior. I'd also, based on something Mr. Goad said, think it would be appropriate to add an item that the city review who its reporting individuals and procurement employees. Procurement employees are defined by statute with a dollar amount, so that should be fairly measurable, but reporting individuals sometimes depend on the structure of your organization, that we might consider a recommendation to the city that they have an ongoing process to review who their reporting individuals are, particularly when there's a reorg, when an individual's job duties change or job title changes, or when someone is promoted. There may be other circumstances, but that they look at that, because I know I would be nonplussed if I were an employee and somebody said, oh, we just determined you should have been filing financial disclosure with the state for the last 3 years, and we're just now telling you when I didn't know that that's how management had described my job.
I do believe I see Ms. Jackson in the back of the room. I do believe that the city attorney's office is undergoing an exercise like that at this time. And I don't know, I see Mr. Cook coming, because his office is actually responsible for maintaining that list and reminding all the folks. So.
Mr. Cook, you recognize, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We are going to take a look at that. I believe that, as a matter of fact, was part of the report on the item that was in question. We do have processes in place, obviously, by the fact that an individual wasn't aware. That process didn't catch everything, so we are, in fact, reviewing that sort of thing. I think in the particular case, it was unusual in that an individual didn't change her office chair, but her reporting duties and responsibilities changed, as opposed to seeing someone leave the organization and be replaced and that sort of thing. So we are, in fact, going to take a look at that and make sure all those proper processes are in place. We'll work with the city attorney and others to make sure that happens.
Okay, thank you. So we might make a recommendation for something you've already done.
Well, if you make it quickly, it hadn't been done, and so we'll let you know.
No, this again is blue sky stuff. The other one that it occurs to me, and Ms. Meadows-Keefe, this might fall on something that would be a responsibility for us rather than something we'd ask the city to do, is that in the ethics training there be an annual update on changes in both the city ordinance and state laws regarding ethics, public meetings, and public records. I know public record exemptions and redaction are a favorite topic of the legislature, and it's not uncommon for there to be a dozen or more bills every year that change the nature of that dialogue.
And that sounds like a great idea. I try to do that during my ethics moments for the board, but they'd be easy to incorporate into training for everyone.
Just so we know that everybody's getting the same comprehensive picture. And I know the city attorney's office, I'm sure, looks at all of that carefully too, but since that sort of falls on our side of the scale, it might be something we want to be careful about. The next item.
He wants to speak on that.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Batzine, I skipped you. I wasn't sure which part of number 3. We may need to renumber 3 as A, B, C, D, E or something.
Okay, we'll start doing that.
Actually, this may come under 13, but I'm cheating a little bit because I was under the impression that Julie Meadows-Keefe's report was going to include the issue of publicizing the $25 rebate program.
Yes.
And I wanted to primarily talk about that. But before that, I'd like to turn back to this issue of the city manager's report just for a moment, if I might. That report, I only read it starting at 10 minutes to 4. And as I read that report, I thought, just how stupid does top-level city management think we are as citizens? The report focuses on the value of tickets and goes through all these gyrations to come out with an answer that they are $100 or less. I don't know how many of you have been to a skybox. I've been to a skybox. Common sense tells you the value is more than $100. Trust me, if you haven't had that experience, have the experience and you'll realize the value of those tickets. But to me, the big issue is, what was the source? What was the source of those tickets in that skybox? Does Rick Fernandez own a skybox? Were they his gift to some of his valued staff? Or was the source some sugar daddy to the city of Tallahassee? And if the source was a sugar daddy to the city of Tallahassee, that creates, in my mind, a culture of corruption. And quite frankly, and I know you're trying to do the right thing, if you had done the investigation, if the ethics board had done the investigation, I have little doubt that you would have not only looked at the value of those tickets, but also the source of the gift, the ultimate source of the gift. Not Rick Fernandez, but where Rick Fernandez got that, and the extent to which that can lead to a culture of corruption, where you've got top city staff saying, we have a sugar daddy out there, and we better not ruffle any feathers because it will be a source of entertainment to us. And I just have confidence that if you all had done that investigation, I think we would have had a very different outcome. But let me talk about this much more minor issue that I wanted to bring to you. You may remember that shortly after this, maybe most of you won't remember this because you weren't even on the board at this time, but we came before you a couple of years ago, shortly after the commission was established, to suggest that the flyer that goes out with these city utilities include mention of the $25 rebate program. And the response at the time was, not so much from the commission, but from the city management, that, oh no, the on-site only deals with city utility issues because it goes into the city utility, along with the city utility bill. Well, I'm looking at the flyers that came with my last utility bill, and they include a major story on hazardous waste, which one could say relates to utilities. Call before you dig, that relates to utilities. But how about Thank You 911, National Fair Housing Month, take the Tally Trees survey. Almost a quarter of the whole document is devoted to a crossword puzzle. I would argue that these don't have anything to do with city utilities, and therefore it is appropriate when 67% of Tallahassee voters approved a ethics provision, a city charter amendment, that includes not only the creation of the ethics board, but also the limit on campaign financing and an alternative to campaign finance that encourages individuals to, in a modest way, participate in the process, and encouraging that would be just as important to add to this document as some of these other stories.
Okay, thank you. If I may, what I'm going to do is ask the board members to remember those comments until we get to item 6 on the agenda, because I think that'll be a good lead-in to us to discuss item 6.
Thank you.
Next is the monthly public records request report for April. Oh, I'm sorry, Dr. Jackson. I didn't see you roam up there.
You had mentioned a little bit before about giving the public an opportunity to speak, and I appreciate your putting that request in. Two things. Every time I hear our attorney speak, honestly, he depresses me. I know he's not doing it on purpose, and he's trying to follow the law. Well, the public is going to see, oh yeah, so they got these free tickets, and what are they going to do? They're not going to do nothing. And if the public could hear what you said, that even if they got more tickets tomorrow, there's nothing we can do. Well, we still have the problem, the perception of the folks out here is this is a corrupt city. The insiders are able to walk away, and the public takes it on the chin. I would ask this commission to put together that list, change the wording as we talked about on what's the violation and the intent, add in every area we need more authority. Let's request the authority. Let's send it to the city commission. And if this group won't work with you, then we'll do the best we can to get you another group here in a few months. But I think the public needs to understand why our hands are tied if, in fact, this commission all agrees with the attorney that there's nothing we can do if you're passing out tickets. One thing, I think that'd help a lot. Secondly, let me talk about the speech. I come up here to city commission meeting, and I have this well documented now. Obviously, the city manager and a couple of the city commissioners would just as soon that I not speak. Well, there's two problems. Number one, I have a constitutional right to speak. So what they've done is they have a limit of 30 minutes. That gives 10 people an opportunity to speak for 3 minutes. But if you have 2 or 3 major issues, what happens, you may have 20 people or more. The county, as we talked about, and I'll praise the county again, they listened to 176 people who waited for 4 or 5 hours to speak, and I thought that's what needs to happen. In this case, the city commission is really pretty sneaky. I come up and I want to speak, so they say, well, yeah, even on an agenda item, what we're going to do is, Mr. Jackson, you can dunk on it. You can be here 30 minutes before the city commission meeting begins, and you're never the first person to speak. If there's 15 people, I'll be number 16. They do that, so then I wait another hour. I wait to the very end, and then I get up for my 3 minutes. They say, oh, well, you can't speak on item 4 that you signed up for that was an agenda. You've got to speak as an unagended speaker. No, that's not what I asked for. I asked to speak on that topic. And the other thing they would do, before I'd have a chance to speak, they go ahead and vote on item 4 an hour and a half earlier. Okay, that's a serious problem. It continues. Now, what else they do to show how dishonest this commission is, and I've talked with the past city attorney, I've talked with our current city attorney, and no one is interested in dealing with it. And if you don't address it, then you're going along with the corruption. I stand here, let's say I have a picture, data, something I want to show you. This deck, table, dais, used to be right over there. That was important to be over there because right above it, it has a camera. I could bring in a sheet of paper, a picture, I could lay it down. The camera would then show the picture right up here on the screen. By moving it back here, you don't have that access. If I bring you something to show you right now, I'm going to hold it up here and you say, you see what I've got here? And the folks at home obviously can't see it. What they've done the last 3 weeks that I've come in here to talk, I have a document. The third week I came in and I got with one of the folks in the back. I said, scan this for me so when I get up there, you can show it up here on the screen. Great. That worked fine. But guess what they did? They didn't show my picture, my design, the information I have to share with the public. They refused to put it on the television. They keep my voice, can get to city employees and the public, but the documents I want to share, they refuse to show on TV. Now, you tell me if that's not a legal issue, and why that happens to me, you probably know the answer. The 2 or 3 people right before me, if they have something, if the city wants to show something, they get it put on the screen. They have a nice program. But for me and for other citizens who speak out about issues they don't want to hear about, they silence you. They silence you by putting you in the very back. They silence you by not allowing you, and I think the Constitution says something about speech and free expression, and my understanding is showing that I have a right to show this picture, or I have a right to show these data or this chart, but in fact they've taken away that right, and they've done that consistently, and the last attorney wasn't interested about doing anything about it, and this attorney's not interested in doing anything about it. And so we'll see if you folks are interested. I would encourage you to do that because taking these guys to court all the time is a pain in the tail, and it's kind of expensive, but I've spent worse money on worse ventures. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Comments, questions from members? We are, once again, we're done with that. Monthly public records request report for, these are the public records requests that came in April. It's a short list. There are 4. 3 of them have been completed. 1 of them is pending. Any comments or questions on any of these? These, again, we're doing this every month just for information for the members of the board, keeping us educated about what's going on, what issues seem to be of interest. Then we have the prior one. This goes for 5 pages. Well, actually, I guess it does run up into April, but this goes back beginning in March. 5 pages of these. Some of them are very minor, asking for a utility bill at a particular address for the prior month, or personnel information on a particular person or class of employees, or information on a particular RFP, or for fire code violations at an address. Did anyone have any comments or questions, follow up on any of these? Seeing none, we would now move to item 4. This is our monthly ethics. Ms. Meadows-Keefe, you're recognized.
And I'm going to move quickly through these because I added one actually today that I didn't share with you, Mr. Chair, so I hope it's okay. The first thing I do is I look at actions taken by the Florida Commission on Ethics in their meetings in the month prior. And this case that you have in front of you, actually it's from January, but I think it was heard the last time. This is the mayor of Atlantic Beach. And this opinion will tell you more than you'd ever want to know about this thing called grandfathering. And this is the former mayor of Atlantic Beach. He was defeated in the election actually by the candidate that ran against him that filed the complaint. And basically the allegation, there were 3 allegations, and the allegations were all dismissed except for one, that this mayor was employed by a supplier of police uniforms to the city of Atlantic Beach. Now, if you are working for an organization before you are elected, and you've been working there, you are grandfathered in, but you're supposed to be separate from any things related to the city. Here, his employment changed after he became mayor, and his company was providing police uniforms. He indicated he had no direct involvement with the police uniform procurement issue, yet when people called and tried to reach a person in charge of the police uniforms, he said, "I'm out of the office. If you have questions about this, please contact Mr. Reeves." So that led folks to believe that he was indeed involved with that. And so they went through a great deal of fact-finding and found out that this should have been something that he disclosed, even though they couldn't really prove he made more money as a result of it. I think they concluded he may have gotten a bonus of about $17 for it. But yet this was enough for him to have one charge against him, and the case settled pre-probable cause. And I'll explain real fast. We always like to learn a little bit about procedure, that you can decide to waive probable cause confidentiality. So if someone has a complaint filed against them, they can determine that they'll waive the whole probable cause process and the confidentiality and proceed right to a settlement of the matter. And so that's what this individual did. So that is that particular case that I brought to you in case you want to get educated about grandfathering and pre-probable cause. The next item I've brought to your attention is something that will be on the ballot for Leon County. So this is a little closer to home. They've done their charter review process, and they are incorporating language related to the Code of Ethics for Leon County. Now, they've had ethics requirements, but they are putting this before the voters to be included in the charter of Leon County. So the county is also pursuing measures to make itself more accountable for ethics. So I just wanted to bring that matter to your attention.
I just want to point out to the members of the board, on line 27 of this proposed ordinance, basically, in terms of how broad the jurisdiction is, it says the Code of Ethics shall include standards of conduct. That's about as much guidance in here, so it would be largely up to the drafters of the code to determine what met that singular criterion. The only other thing in there is lobbyist regulations, or I assume registration of some kind. But they may well be going through the same machinations that we've had to go through.
And then the final thing that I have added is a proposal that will be going before the voters. We had talked a little bit about the Constitution Revision Commission and their recommendations, and that there was a matter pending before them about putting ethics in the state constitution and beefing up some of the requirements, and actually making the waiting period, converting that from 2 years to 6 years before you could go back and lobby or appear before the tribunal where you worked. So this language will come before the voters. And interestingly, there will also be a provision included on a public officer or public employee may not abuse his or her public position in order to obtain a disproportionate benefit for himself or herself, family members, businesses, etc. And the Florida Commission on Ethics is tasked here by rule to define the term disproportionate benefit and prescribe the requisite intent for finding a violation. So this one will be interesting to watch, not only to see if the voters vote to adopt it. I don't know if you're a betting person, but I'm guessing they might. It will also be interesting, if passed, to see how the Commission on Ethics, through its rulemaking, will define disproportionate benefit.
It's also interesting when the Constitution gives an executive or an agency
a task,
performs a state function, a specific rulemaking authority. That's this, by the way, will be one of the, at the moment, 13 items for each of us to vote on, the constitutional amendments for each of us to consider.
It's an unlucky number. And that concludes your ethics.
Okay. Any comments or questions on that? I do. One of the things Julie talked about, grandfathering, I don't know that the concept of grandfathering would apply in our jurisdiction. I'm assuming it probably would not, unless we had a complaint that related to somebody doing business with the city, and that was somehow a misuse of position. We might conceivably get into a grandfathering debate, but let's hope that one does not come before us. Mr. Currington, I'm going to recognize you on both items 5 and 6, and you can, when you get done with 5, we'll take a break. Not a break. We'll pause and take comments and questions from the board members, and then you can roll right into item 6.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You have asked me the following question: whether the board or a member thereof can file a sworn ethics complaint with the Florida Commission on Ethics based upon a citizen's complaint that the city's ethics officer has determined states a legally sufficient complaint under the state's ethics code. That question actually raises two questions: whether this board as a collegial body can file a complaint, and also whether individual members can file a complaint. The short answer to the first question is that this board has both standing and authority to file a complaint that the ethics officer has determined is legally sufficient when the complaint involves officers and employees of the city or members, officers, and employees of any boards, commissions, or committees thereof, because that limiting language is in the charter. And I bring it out only to point out when I answer the second question that is individual members, just like any citizen, you can file a complaint, and it's not restricted to city employees or whatever, as that provision is. Answering the second question, yes, any board member as an individual can file a sworn complaint with the Florida Commission on Ethics. Let me explain briefly how I arrived at those conclusions. Section 112.324, paren 1, paren A of Florida statutes provides that any person may file a sworn complaint. Person is defined to include corporations, all other groups and combinations thereof. The Commission, in fact, has passed a rule, 34-5.001, paren 2, that has affirmatively stated that groups and organizations may file a complaint. So I think this collegial body has the ability, because it is a, quote, person under the definition of the statute. I'd like to address now the ability to refer to an appropriate enforcement agency. Both Section 61 of the Charter and this board's bylaws, Article 9, Section A, provide for referrals by this board to other appropriate agencies. You may recall that the executive director of the Florida Commission on Ethics has advised this board that they will not accept a referral from this board because it's not among the enumerated referrals under Chapter 112. That's all the more reason why this board has the authority, in essence, to file a complaint on its own. I go on to offer, I guess, a little editorial advice. If this board votes in favor of filing a complaint, in my judgment as a collegial body, it ought to be signed by the chair, although it could arguably be signed by any board member. But I would recommend that the chair sign any sworn complaint when it is being filed on behalf of the board after an affirmative vote to file such a complaint with the commission. Now going to the second commission, what if by chance, for example, this board decides not to file a complaint? Can an individual member do so? Again, Section 112.324 says that any person may file a complaint. So I think that is self-evident. Any board member can. Again, I make some editorial comments here, I guess, to avoid future problems. I think any board member could decide to file a complaint even after this board refuses to file the complaint. I don't think you lose your rights as individual citizens to pursue what any other citizen in the city can do. In theory, any member could do it unilaterally without consulting the board or waiting for a board vote. They could jump the gun if they wanted to. I wouldn't say that was advisable or the most professional or courtesy to its fellow members, but a board member could do so. And then my final caveat, I guess, is that should an individual member file a complaint, if they're doing it on their own, I would advise against referring to your affiliation on this board because it's not a board activity, okay? And I would also caution the member, like any complainant, if you file a complaint and it's perjurous or it has a reckless disregard for whether the complaint contains false allegations, you could subject yourself to a claim for sanctions.
Okay. Questions of Mr. Currington? I have actually a comment from Ms. Meadows-Keefe. In terms of complaints filed by the board, would you look at our bylaws and come back to us at the next meeting and make sure that what Mr. Currington has here is consistent with what's in our current bylaws, or whether they need to be updated, amended, addended, whatever?
Okay.
Seeing no questions, Mr. Currington, we're on item 6. You're recognized.
And this goes to the item that we've had some speakers already address earlier, and as the chair referenced, may want to go back to the days. The question was asked whether this board has the authority and/or responsibility to advertise or publicize the campaign contribution refund program. And the short answer is the board does have the authority and responsibility to advertise or publicize that campaign. Section 63 of the city charter requires this board to set time limits and procedures and provide a claim form for registered electors to claim such refunds. And this board is also required to file an annual report to the mayor and city commission showing the total number of such requests. So this board has certain duties, and as I've said in one of my earlier opinions, I think you have due diligence as to all of your duties. You always have the obligation of due diligence. And so I think your due diligence here can be fulfilled by a number of means, which I understand we are already doing as a board, or the ethics officer is already doing. You post this information on the websites. You've made the forms available on the website. You have promulgated some time limits and procedures for filing them, and you have already filed annual reports to the city. I'm suggesting that the board can also make references to this in public notices or in agenda items at their monthly meetings, and also in periodic training, and the board has already been doing some of that. So in my judgment, you are already currently publicizing it, and you are at liberty to increase that publication if you choose.
Okay. Comments, questions, Mr. Currington? There has been interest from the public that we do more aggressive advertising, I guess. So I want to make two suggestions, see what people think. One is that we ask Ms. Meadows-Keefe to write a letter to the city asking for a formal response on whether or not we could include something that would be an eighth of a page maybe in length in the utility mailings. And let's get a firm answer on that. If it's a problem, then they can tell us no, and if it's not a problem, they'll tell us yes. But you know, obviously, we're not asking them to add a page if we can just get stuck on an existing page. And the other, Ms. Meadows-Keefe, and I know you've looked at some of this in the past. If the board doesn't object, I'd like for you to come back to us with one or two options of things that we might do independently and the costs associated with those, whatever you think would be wise, whether it would be an independent mailing we would do or something that we would do to affect advertising along with the associated cost, so the board can make an informed decision. So before I recognize you, any board members have any objections to those two things? Okay. Ms. Meadows-Keefe, you have a comment.
My question would be, I had spoken to the board before about wanting to do a mailer related to the hotline and advising citizens of the existence of the ethics and fraud hotline. So do you think it's message dilution if I do both things? So like it'd be great if I could include that as well as the campaign contribution refund program information. I'd also just include a blurb, it wouldn't take much space, about how to contact the hotline. So that way we don't have to do two separate efforts for that.
And any members object to that? Would reduce our, Ms. Tolliman.
I don't object, but I do have a question maybe about the effective way of advertising for the refund issue. And I don't know if this has been done, but it seems to me that maybe if we could reach out to each campaign and, you know, if there's a form, supply them with the forms so that when they have fundraisers and things, they can just hand them out, you know, as part of that campaign activity.
They get that. I actually do reach out to each individual candidate when they file at the supervisor's office and let them know about the program.
Okay, but I mean, anything we can do to facilitate it, because, you know, when they have a fundraiser and they bring people in, if we could hand them 100 copies of the form in advance of the fundraiser, then, you know, maybe we would increase the activity.
Absolutely. I think based on some of the testimony we've heard, there are people who are interested in encouraging voters the type of voter who doesn't go to fundraisers.
So
maybe get more involved in electoral politics, and that this might be, while not a giant motivation, some motivation for the kind of person that we wouldn't reach that way.
Well, maybe the thing is, if we can convince the campaigns to put on their websites a link to our form or something, so that they, it's right there. If you're going to contribute on the website, hey, there's also you can get some of your money back.
Okay, Ms. Meadows-Keefe can put that on her list, and you'll come back to us next month with any cost recommendations for whatever options we might have, since we got a little bit of time here leading up to November.
Okay.
Okay. Item 7 is the proposed amendment to the city charter. This is Mr. Currington again.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, you have asked me to draft a mandatory language to Section 61, small b of the city charter in order to clarify the board's authority to investigate hotline complaints. As I have advised previously, this board's authority must be expressed and not can be implied. And so to the extent Section 1 is ambiguous, you have before you some proposed language that Section 61 would be amended to insert the words in little Roman numeral 2, where it says, little Roman numeral 3, manage a citywide ethics hotline for receipt of, I recommend insertion, and the investigation of, and then resume with the current language. And then under little v, have the authority to, and I recommend inserting investigate and then return to the current language. In my judgment, this would eliminate any doubt that if the City Commission were to adopt this charter amendment, or the citizens were to adopt it, this board would have the duty to investigate. I don't mean to split hairs, but I know there's been some concern about my prior opinions, and I think Mr. Wilcox alluded to today, because I think he used the term investigate to mean let's get to the truth of the matter, okay? In my earlier opinion, and I agree with that, where we disagree is I have said the board's ability to clarify a hotline complaint where it's really not clear, is this an elections matter, is this an ethics matter, and should we refer it to the state attorney or the state elections commission? Clarifying the complaint to determine that, to me, is not an investigation to get to the truth of the allegations. It's just simply to clarify what the allegation is and who is the appropriate authority to refer it to. This would give this body the authority that I think the people in the audience would like to see, and we can investigate the truth of the allegations and make factual findings.
And then you had one more on the last page, a similar investigate. This relates to the word abuse at the end of this memorandum.
Yes. And I don't know if Julie wants to address this, but our bylaws use the word abuse, but it's not in the charter amendment. So I don't know if there's any concern that someone may say, well, we're going beyond the city charter by adding the word abuse. Abuse is in our bylaws, and it was part of the terminology used when the city first created the hotline. So I think we just simply incorporated it from the current hotline practices.
Okay. So this would be a matter of conforming either our bylaw to the current charter or amending the charter to fit our bylaw.
Correct.
Okay.
That would be easier.
Julie points out the bylaw would be easier. I agree with that. Any comments or questions on these? If the board likes, let's talk about the first part. If the board likes the allowing us to do more of an investigation prior to a referral on hotline things, then we would put this on our list that we talked about earlier of pending issues for a recommendation at some point down the road, since this would require us making a recommendation to the City Commission. If the board doesn't like this, then we would not put it on the list. So, comments, Questions?
I think we should put on the recommendation.
Okay.
I think we should put on the recommendations.
Okay, so we'll add this to the list. Now, in terms of the abuse issue, we have something. This is one where we actually we don't have the choice probably of not doing anything. We ought to either take abuse, the word abuse, out of our bylaw, or we ought to put this draft on our list of possible recommendations to the City Commission. So does anyone have any preferences on that?
Are waste and abuse duplicative?
Well, corruption, fraud, and waste and mismanagement are pretty broad and overlapping terms.
Yeah, I wouldn't be concerned about taking away abuse because I think it's already covered.
Okay. Mr. Currington.
I do think it's maybe a bit redundant, but maybe not totally, and maybe in terms of concentric circles. Just like corruption and fraud, everybody would probably argue that fraud is corrupt, or
Yeah, it's okay.
but.
Do we need a Venn diagram here? Well,
I don't see a meaningful degradation of our jurisdiction if we just conform our bylaws.
Okay, I'm going to take this as a motion for Mr. Holloman to come back with an amendment to our bylaws to remove the word abuse from the bylaw. Do I have a second?
Second.
Ms. Smith's a second. Any debate on that motion? Any comments? Okay, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Okay, Ms. Meadows-Heath will come back with a change to the bylaw. We are the city budget process. Actually, let's take our break now because we ran a little long in the beginning. We'll come back and do items 8 through 14. That'll split us.
Perfect.
We'll take a break now for about 15 minutes. And we're briefly adjourned. Or recessed, whatever it is.
So we'll fix that too.
Okay.
Okay.
We ready in the back?
Go. Just pound your fist there.
Okay, we are back after our little break there. And we are somewhere, we're on the cities, we're on item 8. This is the city's budget process for 2019, which would be the period October 1, 2018 through September 30, 2019, right? Since we're on the local government fiscal year.
You are correct, Mr. Chair, and I'll just, this is going to be a brief summary. Budget is not my forte. On that, I would love to acknowledge Board Member McNeil, who did come to the budget workshop that occurred last week. So I'm thankful for her. The chair had identified her as the, committee of one to assist with the budget. So what they did at this particular budget hearing is they were not, or budget workshop, it was not a hearing, it was a workshop. And Mr. Wiggin basically gave a blue sky view of what it's going to look like this year. So there's some assumptions, and so they went through several of the assumptions they're making for the upcoming fiscal year. There is no plan to hire additional positions unless those are grant-funded positions or through updated rate studies. That doesn't really involve us at all because we're fully staffed, and there's no plan to add to our staff. So that was one of the assumptions. There are currently 2,851.50 positions in the city, and they talked about what they did last year, and they are focusing this year. They always have focus areas each year. One year was public safety budget. This year, they are focusing on public safety, economic development, infrastructure investment and planning, and quality of life. And I did provide to you the document if you want to take a closer look at it. And I also noted that I think city employees, they have slated a 3% increase for city employees. And again, this is just a preliminary document, and there will be additional budget workshops and hearings. And as to our budget, I did talk to Mr. Wiggin about our budget process, and we are right where we need to be, and I will make sure to work with Ms. McNeil as we're going through our process. She and I had talked last year about taking a closer look at our budget for this upcoming fiscal year to see if there were things where we could save and perhaps ask for less money. However, she and I had a brief conversation where we thought that perhaps this may not be the year to do that with the expanded authority that the board now has, and trying to publicize the hotline. And then again with campaign contribution refund program, we're hoping we get a few more requests for rebates this year. So I think we are probably going to just remain at where we were for the last fiscal year in terms of what our requests are.
Okay, but that'll come back before the board.
Absolutely.
Board consider. Any comments or questions on our budget? I personally would like to make sure that we reserve enough money to, we've always thought we might at some point hire an investigator.
Right.
With our jurisdiction, I think that that's important to protect our capacity there. We clearly don't want to hire somebody and have them sitting around doing nothing, but when we need them, we will need them.
Absolutely.
Next is item 9. This is a change to the bylaws concerning complaint procedures. So we're in Article 5 under capital A.
Actually, it's
2 and 3.
Well, let's see. Okay. We have one for board staff and one for complaint procedures. So I think the...
Looking at this one.
Okay. Yes.
So Article 5, board staff.
Article 5, board staff. There is, oh, and I don't see that it's underlined here. So it would be number 2. There had not been a provision in the bylaws for removal of the ethics officer, how that process would occur. So it would be under ethics officer. It's number 2 at the bottom of the page, and then going to A, and then 3A through C. So first of all, it states that the ethics officer may be removed without cause by a 2/3 vote of the board members present. There's also a provision there about administrative leave, and that would be without pay. So if at some point the person in the ethics officer job, there's allegations that are concerning to the board chair that would need to wait to a meeting for the board to address, that individual would be placed on leave without pay. I don't think that this board wants to be in a position where they're paying a person to not do a job. So we've got that there. And then the ethics officer would then remain on leave without pay until the next full board meeting. And again, a 2/3 vote of the board members present would remove that person. The other thing that we had not had in the past was how to fill the vacancy if the job becomes vacant. And we're basically taking from the bylaw on how the board selects its at-large members, which is a pool of applications is selected. In this case, there would be minimum qualifications established for the ethics officer, The Human Resources Department would screen out people who did not meet those minimum qualifications as they do for appointed officials and other applicants. The board would then be provided with the applications of those that were qualified. And the process would basically be, I think the chair would say, each member come back at the next meeting with your top 3 to 5 applicants pulled, and then there'd be an interview process. And the successful applicant would be selected by 2/3 vote of the board members present. So we felt it was important to have succession policies in place since we did not have those in the past.
Okay, this is something we haven't talked about a lot as a board, but Julie raised the issue of succession, and so she and I kind of worked through this over the last month. In 2, the idea is that the ethics officer is an at-will employee.
Correct.
So we hire, we fire. I guess at the bottom of the second page there, the 2 point, the question would be, does the board want to go with 2/3 to remove, a 2/3 vote to remove the ethics officer? We clearly could do it with a majority vote. There's not a lot right now with 6 members. There's not a lot of difference between 2/3 and majority. But if we ever have 7 members, there would be a 1 vote difference. So does anybody have any preferences on that point? Or one, does anybody think we don't need to do this? I mean, we're just kind of dropping this on you guys.
Got to do it.
Okay, well, let me move on then. In 2A, we realized there might be situations where we had an ethics officer who did something so egregious that we did not want to wait till the next board meeting. So this would allow the board chair to act as an individual up until the time of the next board meeting to place the ethics officer on leave without pay if there were reasonable allegations that could constitute cause for dismissal. So this is not it's not where the board chair can say, I don't like you, I think on an at-will basis, I would like to see you fired, I'm going to put it on the next agenda, you're on administrative leave. This one would require some reason for the chair to act. Then when the full board at the next meeting acted, they could either act because there was a cause for dismissal or because they perceive the person as at will, and just on 2/3 they could dismiss them with no cause. It would be a kind of a vote of confidence. The chair could only suspend, if you will, the ethics officer for some reasonable allegation. And that again raises the issue of 2/3 versus simple majority, and I assume we'd want to do the same thing in both places. And in the hiring process in 3, to me, the only complicating factor there is whether we would need to do B at all, whether we need to take a big pool and get it down to a group of finalists and bring them in for interviews, or whether we could just go straight to C. I think in an abundance of caution, not knowing who we might be evaluating, that we might want something beyond a piece of paper. We might want either one of us acting as a committee of one or the group have the ability to actually talk to the finalists. So that's why it is perhaps a little overcomplicated, but it again raises the issue of, do we want to select the ethics officer by a new ethics officer by a 2/3 vote or by a simple majority? So those are kind of the issues as I see them. This again would be first reading, and we'll bring it, unless people think that we don't need to do it, we would bring it back next month with any changes that you all might have tonight. Mr. Holloman is leaning forward.
Well, actually, I have a question about a different section in here. I mean,
okay.
I'm okay with all the 2/3 things we're doing, but there's one, let's see, this is the duties of the ethics officer. 1I, I guess it is, investigate all complaints of ethics codes violations.
Yep.
And if we're revising bylaws, should we have something either, or her designee or something? Because if we have an investigator, it's not going to be the officer doing it, it's going to be the investigator doing it. So can we give her the authority here to designate somebody to do the investigation, or some language that would incorporate, some investigative function.
Designated either by the ethics officer or by the board.
Yeah.
Yes, that's a great idea, yeah.
So I'll put that, would
That'll
this
be in-
count as first reading?
I think it can.
Jerry, do you think this can count as first reading?
Well, I'm looking right now. I think somewhere in our procedures, I'm looking at, let me see, Article 9 under complaint procedures. I think we addressed it. Let me look for a minute.
Okay,
Can we
that's fine.
table this for a second? Or-
Yeah, let's not count that
Okay.
as first reading.
Okay,
We'll have that
I'll bring it back.
first reading next month. We will have Jerry's question answered, and because it really is separate from replacing an ethics officer. But that will be back also. Any other comments, concerns, additions, deletions, shreddings? Okay, we will see this again next month. Be thinking about the language in here that Julie calls succession planning. If there's anything that you want to see added, I do want Julie on 2, it just has a little a, and for parallel purposes there ought to be a little b, so the last sentence could be a little b.
Okay.
See right here?
Oh, I
Just
see.
make that a b.
Okay.
I think, and that, I was always taught you can't have an a if you don't have a b.
Okay. I'll call you Sonny.
No, that's House bill drafting. Our next item is, this is item 9, is the, related to complaint procedures.
Correct.
So on this, we go to, on printed copy, it's on the second page, it's 7A. This is new language that would be inserted into how we handle hotline calls or complaints where we are referring them to someone else to take a look at. So, Ms. Meadows-Keefe, you're recognized.
Well, this is basically to address some of the concern that we've heard from the public about trusting investigations to city staff. So in the existing bylaw, and we cited to this before, one of the difficulties was that it was required that the assistant city manager or city manager would investigate complaints regarding employees. We saw some difficulties with this, and we heard the concerns voiced, so therefore we've added to the bylaw that says if the hotline call or complaint contains allegations the board determines cannot be adequately investigated by city staff, the board may direct the ethics officer, and we may want to think about, to investigate the hotline call or complaint, comma, to have an investigation conducted by a third party. So that kind of goes to what Mr. Holloman was saying before, or to otherwise follow up on the call or complaint and to report the status at the next board meeting. So this would give this board discretion to say, in this particular matter, we would like the ethics officer to be in charge of this particular investigation.
Or we want to hire an investigator,
Right.
or we want we don't want to refer it to a manager in the city. We want to refer it directly to the governor or law enforcement or whomever. Mr. Currington, you're
I
recognized.
could go back, and I think it's relevant to this and Mr. Holloman. Article 9, Section B, under complaint procedures, under B1 says the board, by and through the ethics officer and independent investigators shall investigate. And then under B5, where it says second stage, if the complaint is found to be legally sufficient, the investigator shall collect all evidence materially related, the investigator selected by the board.
Okay.
So I think our rules probably address Mr. Holloman's concern.
Okay.
I mean, I would hate to have an inconsistency in the bylaws that we could easily correct. I would still suggest that we change the language where it just says that the executive director shall do all investigations, such that we recognize, as provided in other sections, whatever.
Yes.
Just not to have anything we can fix.
We'll get that. At some point, maybe we just need to define investigator as the executive director or any other person designated by the board, and just use the word investigator. Yes, sir.
Just a question on the 7A changes, and this is, because I haven't participated in one of these yet, but what are the circumstances under which we go into executive session?
Ms. Meadows-Keefe, you want to do that one, or?
I'm happy to do that one with possible corrections, but you go into executive session prior to probable cause being decided. So this board has gone into executive session to determine, for example, legal sufficiency. So once a complaint comes in, there's a preliminary determination, yes, this could fall within our purview. I'm directed to do a preliminary investigation, and then that is presented to the board. In an executive session, we have a court reporter there, and then the board votes on whether they believe legal sufficiency exists, and then that transcript is then made available to the public, and that's through operation of statute in 112. There's a specific carve-out that says, much like at the Florida Ethics Commission, until a determination of probable cause, it's confidential.
So do we have a definition of legal sufficiency?
In the bylaws, I
don't know that we do in the bylaws, but because we're following the same statute, because it talks about the State Commission on Ethics or any local similar commission, we'd be there. Whatever the law is there, we would be following, and that, I think, has been litigated.
The allegations, if proven true, constitute a violation of the blankety-blank ethics code. So that's the standard for legal sufficiency.
Okay.
Is that right, Jerry?
Yes.
Okay, I think I had that one memorized.
So on the executive session issue, does what we're doing in 7A in any way get involved with what we should be doing in an executive session? And if it did, would we need to address that in here?
I think, Mr. Chair, I think that if the board directed, just by review of the sheet with no names on it, you guys had concern about a particular matter, the chair in the past with the board vote has said, Julie, please investigate this hotline call. And the way that that would get reported would be at the next board meeting, but it would be an executive session.
Okay.
And then usually what the board has done in the past is when they emerge from executive session, there's some kind of order that's been signed by the chair that's provided to the press, and we generally will come out and inform the public. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so this language is intentionally as broad as we thought we could make it to allow the board to follow up in an appropriate manner. We would still, if it's for instance, a line worker in the city, we would still, or the issue with P cards, for instance, issues of P cards, we would still look, and the city auditor's doing an audit, we would still look to them on issues like that, where it was an issue involving a management position in the city. Then this would give us the option not to simply go to, top-level management who might be implicated in the issue, to instead go straight to an independent investigation rather than going through this initial step when the results of that initial review would be coming out of the box, we know are going to be questioned. Okay, so seeing no other concerns, again, we have the opportunity at the meeting next month to fine-tune this, and we'll go back and take a further look into, particularly Ms. Meadows-Keefe, in terms of making sure this works with shade meetings.
Yes, sir.
So that there's no that we're, because would an investigation, if we decided to hire an investigator, would that always automatically result in going into a shade meeting, regardless of the results of the investigation?
I would assume, Mr. Chair, that if you went to the time and expense to hire an investigator, you would want the information discussed fully with names, et cetera. So I would say I can't think of a situation where this board would decide to hire an investigator and not want to go into that shade process.
Okay. Well, but think about that a little bit more. Just if we need flexibility, I want to make sure that we can do what we need to do both to prosecute ethics violations and also to protect individuals' rights during the process, particularly
Absolutely.
individuals who may be wrongly accused or accused of something they didn't do.
You have a speaker.
Oh, I apologize. I didn't look up. Mr. Wilcox.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Chair and members of are you at the end of the bylaw discussion now?
We are, well, I was going to move on to the next item, but if you want to talk about bylaws, talk about whatever you want to talk about.
Okay, well, I just very briefly, Article 5, the Ethics Officer, 3A, this is for if a vacancy occurs and says the city's Human Resources Office will pre-screen applicants. I'm just a little uncomfortable with that as far as the independence of the board. I think you should see
the chair can do it.
all the applicants.
Okay,
Have
then
a committee as you
I understand that concern. Let's do this. Let's say a member of the board will pre-screen applicants, and when we get to that point, it may be the board chair, or maybe we'll do a committee of one, and the committee of one can do the budget and the screening.
Perfect. The budget.
She didn't look at me.
Renee gets that one.
I was trying to see if I could get a rise. We'll just change that
Let me make that note. Hold
to a
on
member of the
second.
board. Sure,
Okay.
sure. And unless anyone has a problem with that. Because again, what it's going to be doing is just going down a checklist and saying if the
They have
minimum
education.
qualifications in education, if it requires a bachelor's degree and somebody's got a high school diploma and 2 years of community college, they don't get a check mark. It's not it's a green eye shade function.
Right.
Not to insult anyone who wears green eye shades.
It's a lot of work if you get 150 applications. So that's what they got the last time. So.
Okay, the next item on our agenda is item 10. This is the memo that would go out to candidates. Remember, this memorandum flows from the email investigation that concerned whether or not the city's email system or public officials were using emails for campaign-related or for non-public business. And the grand jury found that the elected official in question did not, but that one of two staff did on one occasion send I'm assuming a bulk email or email to multiple people that did not involve city business. That's kind of where this started, and it has evolved into a memorandum from this board to the candidates, urging them, and I'm assuming that any responsible candidates taking a very close look and has consultants on Chapter 106, but also on to both officials, candidates, and employees, the last paragraph, not using city resources for anything related to campaign activities, fundraising, or other activities. So it is broader than just to candidates. It is the key part in my mind is to remind all of the employees of the city and people like us that we can't use any of the resources that the taxpayers are providing to foster election or campaign activities.
Correct.
Did I omit anything, Ms. Meadows?
No, I don't believe that you did. What this is designed to do is a commissioner had suggested that this memo be revised and provided to candidates. So as I stated, I reach out to candidates when they file with the supervisor and let them know about the campaign contribution refund program. This memo would be provided to them as well as the campaign contribution refund program information. And I was appreciative of the commissioner who brought this up, and Mr. Holloman made some suggestions. And so what I did is direct this towards candidates so that they know how to properly approach government employees, and especially protecting our own employees.
Right. Since certainly City of Tallahassee employees have every right to be involved in campaigns and the elections process, and probably good for democracy when people get involved, but they can't do it with taxpayer money or taxpayer-provided resources. So any comments or questions on this? I think we're done. We'll be done after this meeting with this issue. Item 11 is an update on the public records policy. This is, you remember, the Tallahassee Democrat got into a legal dispute with the city over public records, particularly email and other potentially transitory records that might not be captured on the city computers or on city servers. And Ms. Meadows-Keefe, if you want to hit us with the highlights of this.
I will hit with the highlights. Not too hard. This was last revised after our last board meeting, so I would point out, just to the city's credit, that they have continued to update the public records policy to comply with the court order, and they are seeking to improve their compliance. So this is one of a succession of revisions we've seen to public records policy. So you'll see they've got a goal of prompt handling within 3 business days. They have a renewed, they do have a special hotline that they have set up, which I'm seeing now for the first time, actually, 891-RECS, R-E-C-S. So they actually have a mechanism to grieve if a requestor believes that he or she is being subject to undue delay in compliance, and they've set up an email box for that as well. They are making sure that training takes place on a regular basis, and they're reminding folks again that employees are specifically prohibited from using private, non-city email servers to conduct city business. Examples include Gmail and Yahoo.com. And they're saying that if for some reason someone sends something to you on your personal email address, that you are to transfer those to the custody of the city. And generally that just means forwarding it to the records custodian at the city, so it's hosted on talgov.com. They're wanting to make sure everybody has updated copies of the Sunshine Manual, which we all know and love, and that reminding staff, and we know the law says that public records requests do not have to be put into writing. This is a policy incorporating that and reminding folks that they cannot ask people to put their requests in writing. And there's training requirements. And I will say, whenever I talk to folks in my training capacity, I always talk to them about Sunshine and public records. So these are the highlights.
Okay. Comments? Questions? Ms. Meadows-Keefe, I do have 2 things for you to pass on to the city on this, if you would. On page 5, they talk about, they have a provision specifically related to text messaging, and they say technologies other than text messaging, we intend this to be broadly interpreted. I have long had a concern that if I use VoIP, Voice over Internet Protocol, when I call you and we have a live phone conversation, that phone conversation, in fact, is being digitized and is being stored on a server, even though it may only be stored there for milliseconds. It is, in fact, a record under any other view of records. So I question, now, I'm not talking about leaving a VoIP message. I'm talking about having a live VoIP phone call. I think the language that they have here, because they talk about Skype and Instagram and Twitter and all the instant messaging and all these other things, they don't ever say that, but they may want to be careful about, or at least to think about that when people are having a live telephone conversation. If it's over the old phone lines, analog phone lines, it's clearly not a public record. If it's a VoIP call, there is no case law yet, but that's just something to be aware of. But then I have a big problem at the bottom of page 5 where they talk about email disposal. Email is not a type of record. I mean, in a sense, it's a type of record, but what defines retention schedules
Type of
for
message.
is the content of the email. So if I have an email that has content that state law says has to be maintained indefinitely, I don't get to delete that email because it's in the form of an email. It's still a record and cannot be deleted after some specified period of time because of the format in which the information exists. I think that is
So are you
a problem.
Are you asking?
I'm asking you
yeah.
I'm asking you simply to relay those concerns. If we need to write a memo, we can do that. But if you would just relay those concerns, particularly the second one, I think that they have the potential. Let's say that you did all business by email. You didn't do any memorandums. You didn't distribute anything other than by email. This would treat all records exactly the same, regardless of their content, and I don't think you can legally do that.
The Department of State probably has guidance on that
I
as well.
believe they do.
Yep. Okay.
So
You have. I think we're at the end of the speaker.
board member discussion regarding issues desired for future agendas. Please, again, remember to call or email Ms. Meadows-Keefe if there's anything you want to put on our list of potential recommendations to the City Commission for ordinances, policies, procedures. Does anybody have anything they want on the next agenda that we have not already added tonight? Seeing none. Any further public comment? Dr. Jackson, you're recognized.
I've got two quick ones. One, I was listening to your communication up there, your conversation. You said nothing about Facebook. And the reason I mentioned that is I've been Facebook friends with Scott Maddox for a while. And
actually, they do in their policy say Facebook. I just didn't.
Well, okay, but here's what the issue is. He decided to defriend me, and I was somewhat hurt. But there is a federal case. The President of the United States was sued by a whole host of fairly liberal attorneys and institutions, and the ruling was that a politician, elected official, cannot defriend his I'm his
constituent.
Thank you. I just went brain dead. So that is the law of the land, and I think that needs to be in when we talk about ethics. And the point being is freedom of speech. If you don't want to hear what I have to say to an elected official, then fine, don't be an elected official. So you don't have the right to cut off this microphone as they have a few years ago, not show my picture, or you don't have a right. Now, anyone on this commission here, I think, can defriend me if you want to, but an elected official doesn't have that right. So I want to throw that out real quick.
One second, Ms. Meadows-Keefe, can you find that opinion and email it to us?
I will.
I'm assuming they draw a distinction between a politician's personal Facebook
page
and
their
his
business page.
That's correct.
Okay, so you're saying that there's been a block on his public page of you?
Well, what I'm saying is there is a law, and then what happened, once I pointed that out to him and gave him the references, we became friends again.
Or if you want to send those references to Ms. Meadows-Keefe, she's going to send them out to all of us because this is interesting.
Mr. Jackson?
I can get it for you.
Okay, awesome. Okay.
Then the last thing, and we have a person who's announced to run for city commission. She's an executive director, president of a bank, and she has two board members, Dustin Daniels and Ben Pingree. Now, if in fact this person wins, then she's going to have city employees are going to be her supervisor. But if she wins in the banking situation, but at the city, she'll be their supervisor, or however you call a city commissioner over a employee. So that seems to be, I don't know what you do in that case, but there's certainly a conflict of interest.
I'm make sure I understand. Dustin Daniels has left, has he not?
He's left, but I think he's talking about the female candidate from the bank.
Yes.
Is that right?
Lisa Brown.
On her board, two people who are on the board of the bank.
Actually, I've been told there's 4 city employees, and that was a week or so ago. So Dustin Daniels, I don't know if he's officially off, but then you're going to have a problem. What if he wins? You're in the same situation. And also Ben Pengree that deals with millions of dollars, and you can see the obvious conflict there. So I don't know what you do. She hasn't won, so it's not a problem, but I don't know if it would be important for the ethics officer to at least give Lisa Brown or to give the city employees a heads up of what this conflict is, because it's going to be an obvious conflict.
Well, and that's right in line with the ethics moment that we had, which was all about that one mayor doing business with your own agency. So it's exactly in line with something we've talked about. Something to come back to. We need to watch that one, and if there's advice we need to give to people, or that for current employees, the city attorney ought to be given to people. That would be advice well taken, I'm sure. Mr. Wilcox.
Yes, one last thing, Board Chair and members of the board. I just wanted to call to your attention that the Ethics Board has pretty much fallen off the radar screen for the city's website. You used to be on the front page of the city's website. Now you're not anywhere on the front page. If you go down to the For Our Citizens category, and you're not listed there, but then there's you hit full site directory, and you get a huge list of all the city departments, but if you look under E for Ethics Board, you're not under that category. You're under I for Independent Ethics Board, which is kind of difficult for a citizen who's trying to find the ethics board. I think it's kind of counterintuitive or something. So just wanted to point that out, and hopefully you could get more prominently displayed there. So
I will work on that tomorrow.
Or $15 a quarter, we can have our own website with a .com.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay.
Thanks for the heads up on that one. Anyone else? No other public comments? Anything else from the members of the board? Our next meeting will be Tuesday, May 17th from 4 to 7 here in the city chamber. And with that, we are adjourned.
Right.